For many years, I struggled with trust. Who here has struggled with trust? And when I say trust, do you think I mean trusting others? Yes? Yeah, I can see some nods. For so long, I believed that trust was about trusting others. But I was wrong. I didn't fully understand trust until I dared go on a solo cycling expedition of 2 months, 3,000 kilometers across the villages of rural India. Now, this wasn't an organized cycling trip. There was no support if I broke down, if I didn't have any food and water, if I had a medical emergency. So, what took me on this precarious journey? Growing up in an Indian village, I felt it a crime to be born a female. I saw women being harassed during the day, and I heard their screams pierce the stillness of the night. From the violence inflicted by men, by their fathers, brothers, uncles, and men in the community, I decided that humanness was my battle. And my bicycle was my weapon to freedom, to be me. I wore a mask which was rebellious, but my truth was different. From the age of 12, I was hit, blamed for my abuse, from being groped in the street to being unsafe in my own home. I was broken. My childhood experiences shattered my trust. Silence is the enemy, but the social norms of society taught me to not speak up, not seek help, to carry on. My experiences are regrettably a very common problem among children and women, not just in India, but globally, and human traffickers prey on them. After enduring the abuse for almost a decade, I went to sell myself, to run away from the abuse. I was suicidal. I wanted to give up. My mother desperately sought a solution for me to leave. I escaped from the abuse and the human trafficking. But 1 in 3 women suffer from physical and sexual abuse. And there's 30 million women and girls trafficked. I decided that it was my place, that I could do something to prevent this atrocious problem. So when I came to Australia, I was 22. For 7 years, I left the past behind and I studied behavioral science, studying why people behave the way they do and understanding the specific scientific methods that we can use to shift behaviors. Now, when I was doing this research, my trust in myself was low. And I felt like after finishing a master's degree that what I had studied was not enough. So I went on to do a PhD. And during my PhD, what I realized was that I was drawn to another subject, the science of self-trust research. Now, being drawn into this research, I went to explore what is really the science of trust telling us. Is trust all about trusting others, or is there something more to it? And what I found was that there is something more to it, and it's called self-trust. Self-trust is the precursor to giving trust to others. Self-trust, in my practical definition, is the belief a person has to be able to handle any situation irrespective of the outcome and irrespective of the shadows. Self-trust is actually not linked to success, but it's actually linked to being human. Low trust in others is linked to low self-trust. And low self-trust is linked to bullying, criticisms, demeaning behaviors. Now, low self-trust is something that we all somehow want to change. I wanted to change it. And so when I went into looking at the neuroscience, what I found is that we are not stuck with the brains that we are given. In fact, neuroplasticity experiments confirm that we can increase our self-trust at any age just by using the correct techniques. And so, at the age of 28, I decided, with the help of my own research and some incredible therapists, to actually start exploring how I could rebuild myself and my self-trust. But by the end of my PhD, I was ecstatic with the new me. But I was drawn into the wilderness of researching more about self-trust. Now, what I decided was the self-trust was something that was constantly needing my attention. Now, when I left India, I had made a promise to myself, right, that I was going to do something. And unfortunately, the globally publicized sexual violence and acid-throwing attacks in India made me very scared to return to this country to heal my trust issues. But after 2 years of being torn, I decided to face my fears and take the step of going and cycling across India, because I had to give trust to build my self-trust. So in 2015, I decided that I was going to do this cycling trip. And at first, some of my friends were really happy about coming along with me. But then, as the date neared, they all pulled out. This was a pivotal moment between me deciding whether I was going to go solo or abandon something that represented me developing my self-trust. So on October 15th, in the year 2015, I packed my small little bags with just a couple of clothes, with a phone and a laptop, and took off, cycling solo, without booking any accommodation, unsupported, to cycle across India. When I first started, I started in the Himalayas. And the journey in the Himalayas was rough. The mountains were incredibly steep. There were cargo trucks on these narrow, winding roads on which I was. And so after a few hours, I decided to take a rest stop in a Buddhist temple. And as I stopped, I saw a car pull up. I was so scared. Being so scared brought up so many negative memories. But I knew that perhaps the future does not have to be like the past. Perhaps I could actually come back to this moment, breathe into this moment. And so in the next couple of seconds, what I did was I became mindful and brought myself to the present moment and waited for him to arrive. And as he arrived, all he did was say respectfully, "Do you need any help?" My inner world just completely shifted. He then went on to tell me that he lived in the area and it was very unusual for a girl to be cycling alone. At which point I asked him, or actually I told him, that this is my truth, that this is what I've been through, and that I believe that giving trust is what builds trust. And so here I am. And in fact, if I was successful riding across India, then perhaps other girls could use me as an example to build their own self-trust. Hearing this, and after chatting a little bit, he invited me to come and spend the evening and perhaps stay over with his family, with his daughters. This was my first experience, so I was so apprehensive. I didn't know what I was going to get into. So when I arrived and I knocked on the door, I was scared again. The pattern returned, the negative memories returned. But once again, this time, I had a positive experience to bring in. And so I thought of him approaching me respectfully. And when the door opened, his wife and daughters welcomed me like as if I was part of their family already. We cooked and ate and shared stories together. And these small actions built trust. So I realized that perhaps the metaphor of a bicycle was appropriate for self-trust. So just like a bicycle needs to be balanced in order to stay upright, self-trust actually needs a balance of giving trust and accepting trust to be able to build trust. So I finished staying at his place, and then the next day I was on the road again. But I was cycling through rural villages, and so sometimes men verbally abused me and stalked me. But this time, I had my self-trust. I had the courage to ask for help and the vulnerability to be able to speak my truth. So about midway across my journey, I checked my emails. And when I checked my emails, I saw an email from the Australian government. What I have failed to tell you is that the promise that I had made to myself, what I did was, ever since I came to Australia, I started saving up every day until I had saved $140,000 in just 10 years to be able to build a safe house for the children and women who were being abused. This email gave me some incredibly bad news. This email told me that the company that I had invested the money in, which was going to mature into just the next couple of months, was being investigated for a Ponzi scheme. The money was gone. I was devastated. My heart sank. I felt like abandoning the trip. I felt like I had let down every girl, every child who I had escaped from being abused or being trafficked. So then, but after a few days of thinking about it, I realized that if I had to take the next step, what I would need to do was to forgive not only the company, but also myself. I would have to stop blaming the company and myself so that I could take the next step and start again. So, having forgiven myself and the company, I got on the bike and started riding again. I started connecting with the women and children along the way. And this allowed me to rebuild my strength and allowed me to make a new decision. I made the decision that when I came back to Australia, I was going to take people on cycling trips to India and raise funds. And now I have a community of people working towards this effort. On the last day, I arrived at Kanyakumari, which is the southernmost tip of the Indian subcontinent, a place where one of Buddha's students attained enlightenment. I realized that I had nurtured my mindfulness and my meditation to consistently come back to the present moment. And that is what kept me calm, irrespective of the uncertainties, irrespective of having to start again. The solo cycling became a pilgrimage, which taught me that self-trust is all about giving trust. And giving trust actually builds trust. And trusting in good is what actually allowed me to overcome my fears, my setbacks, my challenges, to do good for humanity. Thank you.